This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Basketball Australia National Talent Identification Coordinator Tony Casella. He discusses the performance and participation program within Basketball Australia, how they create environments for multi-skilled and positional players, as well as some of the key frameworks for talent identification within basketball in the country. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Tony, thanks very much for jumping on. I'm not sure what the time is over your end, but I'd imagine it's a bit later than it is here for me. But how are things your end? All okay?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and have a chat to you about whatever you want to know about what I do in my world. But no, I'm really good. I'm really good. Like I said to you earlier on, I'm just like everyone this time of year is really busy, so just trying to tie up some loose ends and then plan for next year.
Perfect. So for people that maybe haven't come across you or don't know your background, you just kind of want to give us a whistle-stop tour, I guess, of what you do now, and then maybe some major junctions across your journey to get to that point.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've got two jobs in basketball. So my first job is at Basketball South Australia as a coach educator, and I also work in the community space as well. And I also have another job at Basketball Australia as a talent scout. So with my job at Basketball SA, what I do is I take coaching courses for the entire state. So I help educate coaches across all the different clubs and get them up to speed with the modern way of coaching. Also do a little bit of community work as well. I've recently done some walking basketball. I'm not sure how big that is in the UK, but it's getting some legs here in Australia, and it's actually quite interesting and exciting, and a lot more engaging and more dynamic than what I initially thought. So that's been fun. My Basketball Australia role is a really cool role, actually. I've had it for 3 years now, and we've got a team of 5. And basically, what we do is we look after, we keep eyes on basketball talent around Australia and also overseas that aren't in the high performance world. So they might be players who are late developers or people that can't really afford to be in the mainstream system. So that's a really good job, and I get to speak to a lot of really influential people and find information about some hidden gems. So that's been really exciting. But I guess my journey to that point, it's been a long one. Traditionally I've been a coach. Like, I'm a coach by trade. I've coached at a variety of different levels. I've coached at junior levels. I've coached at senior levels, state representative levels, semi-professional. And it's been an amazing journey. So I've been doing it for about 25 years now. And I kind of got my first full-time basketball job about 2 years ago. And along the way, there was obviously a lot of setbacks, but I was just determined to finally get myself a role in basketball, and I've done that. And it's been amazing, and I've learned so much along the way as well. Like, one of those things is when you're first starting out and you're young, sometimes you're a bit naive and don't understand what it takes to actually get a job in sport. And I'm assuming it's like this in your part of the world as well, but it's not easy. And I guess most people would love to work in sport. That's their ideal, it's their dream job. So I've been lucky enough to have some build some relationships over the years that have helped me, and people done some favors for me, which has helped me get to where I am today. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey and so much more to learn, as they say.
Yeah, and you're 100% spot on. It's exactly the same over here in terms of, it's a very in-demand type roles within sport, because, it's essentially a hobby that you're getting paid to do, with a little bit of hard work tied alongside it. So I guess a good starting point for us is, what does the framework of basketball look like in Australia? So we get an idea, I guess, of, number of participants, what the pathway could potentially look like from, I guess, a developmental point of view, all the way through to, those high achievers or high performance pathway type players. What does it actually look like within Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good question. One I get asked from a lot of people from overseas, and we are obviously from internationally. Our men are ranked third in the world, and our women are second. So we're looked upon as a place that, like, especially from population share, like, what do you guys do? Like, what's the secrets? But our structure has been pretty consistent over the last couple of decades. So from a beginner, so I'll start from the start. Obviously, like, you're wanting to start out playing basketball. So we're club based. So normally what happens is kids the age of like 5 and 6, they come into what they call Aussie Hoops, which is just a learn the skills type program once a week. And then once they do that, and there's some small sided games and some learning that goes along in addition to just skills work. And then from there, they transition into what we call domestic competition. So domestic competition is a club will run a competition for a number of kids, and it can be under 8s to under 10s, under 12s, and basically they make up a competition. The teams play against each other, and then it's a kind of like they play at the same location every week. It's low cost. It's not as serious as what happens when you get into the next stage. So from there, you go into playing what we call district basketball or club basketball, and you get the age groups there are 10s, 12s, 14s, 16s, and 18s. That's the junior side of things, and then from there you get in and you play from Division 1 all the way down to Division 5 and 6, and you play for your club and you play for other clubs around your state, if that makes sense. And then from there, what happens when you get to under 16s? That's when all the states pick their teams, and what they do is they go away to what they call Australian national championships. So in those championships, obviously all the states play against each other, and it's the best kids from each state competing. And then from there, generally what happens is the better players get selected to go to the Centre of Excellence, or the NBA Global Academy, which is located in Canberra. I'm assuming most of the people that are listening have some understanding of where that is and what that's about, but I'll give you a quick snapshot. So most of our NBA players have gone through that program. So that's obviously in Canberra. It's like a hub, an academy where the players live on site. They go to school there, and it's world class, and it's produced many different high level NBA players over the years for Australia, and those players generally go on, and the ones that obviously make it into the NBA obviously represent Australia at senior level. So off the back of that as well, obviously we're under 15s now, under 15s, 17s, and 19s, Australian men's, the junior Australian national teams. So players get selected from that. Now, they can be a combination of players who are already in the Centre of Excellence or NBA Global Academy, in addition to just playing for their state. So the other thing too that I probably failed to mention, every state also has like a high performance program. So they have all the players that are, I guess the top 20 in their age group. They all every week, a couple of times a week, in addition to their club commitments, they play or they get specialized training, and they get the strength and conditioning and all the best services possible. So that's a layer of it as well. And after that, obviously, you work your way through, and if you're good enough, you can go and play in our semi-professional league. And once again, it's still club based, and they call that the NBL 1, which is like a Division 2 league over here. And then obviously NBL is the top league in Australia, and then the WNBL for women is the top league as well. So that's kind of like the end-to-end pathway, and it's been amazing. It's actually been quite a solid setup. Now, the thing is too, like, there's been other providers starting to pop up now, and we don't discriminate against players that aren't in the high performance system. If you're good enough, then we want you to play for our country. There's no doubt about that. But generally speaking, I think what's made it successful is the players seems to be pretty smooth as far as once they kind of go from club, they play in their state teams, and then if they're lucky enough to go and represent Australia, or they go to the the Centre of Excellence, everything seems to be aligned. So Basketball Australia does a really good job of setting like a core curriculum or a style of play that kind of filters down to all the states. So it's more so about like teaching the kids how to play the game out of concept, so that they can play in any system. And generally speaking, that's worked really well over the years, and it's something that we continue to keep pushing and making sure that kind of everyone's on board with what we do. So that's kind of I hope that summarizes it, but that's kind of the end to end of what you do when you're first starting out, from a domestic level going into club basketball, and then from there going to represent your state. And if you're lucky enough to obviously go to the Institute of Sport, which is used to be was the COE, now used to be called the Institute of Sport, and represent Australia at the national level. So yeah.
No, that's perfect. It makes complete sense. I think, obviously, as you mentioned, there are quite nice pathways and probably level in the commitment in terms of district and state, and how the travel, etc., goes from there. I guess from an Australian point of view, because it'd be hard for you to look at this, I guess, from the NBA global side. But what type of player identification models do you guys use to assess those players? So obviously, you're kind of, it's always a balancing act, as I found in the talent identification space, of going, what's their performance now versus what do we think their potential could be in a few years' time, and wanting to obviously get high potential players within the building. So what do you guys do in terms of identifying individuals that you think might be appropriate for these elite performance pathways?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's three kind of streams that we look at. The first one is obviously, do they have the skill to play in today's modern game? Can they play multiple positions? Are they an elite shooter? Can they defend the ball? They're probably the main things as far as skill. And if they can't, do they have the can they develop that? And the thing is with talent ID, and as we all know, it's not an exact science, and people get it wrong. Obviously, a lot of the professional teams still get it wrong to this day. So it's not an exact science, but I think that's probably, obviously, do they have talent? That's obviously really important. That kind of falls into the skills, what they can provide you on the court. So that's probably the first stream. The second one is obviously body types are really important. Obviously, how long and how athletic they are. I think that's really important. Now, that's not it's not a red flag if you're not that, because there's a lot of players that have gone on to represent our country that aren't super athletic or super tall or super long, but that obviously does help. So we do try and look for obviously athletic players who are obviously fast and and have a little bit of length on them as well, because that obviously helps in today's modern game. Especially helps you become versatile, flexible. So if you need to play multiple positions, you can. And then the last one is character. This is a big one. And this is the stuff that it's the hardest to find, is the intel. So generally speaking, you can tell whether someone is athletic, or they've got the physical tools, or they've got certain skill. They're a good shooter, they can defend, they've got high basketball IQ. Those things you can generally tell when you watch a game, and you can kind of figure out whether it translates to the next level, which is once again, that's another piece that is important, that you figure out a way whether you can determine whether they can play at the next level. And then obviously with the character, it goes into a lot of reference checks. What are they like as a teammate? Are they are they like, obviously do they support their teammates when things aren't going their way? What are they like as a student? What are they like towards their parents? Are they respectful? Are they respectful to the coaches? Do they love the game? What's their kind of their injury history like? Who's their who's their group of friends that they associate with? What are their hobbies? What's the likelihood that they'll be a player that could represent Australia in a positive way? Do they have all those things, all those intangibles that help with Australian teams? And you obviously would have seen over the years, in particular with the Boomers and the Opals, and while they're so successful, they've just got that mateship, that they just want to do whatever it takes to help their team win, and they'll make sacrifices. So I think the other thing too is with most teams, you've got 3 or 4 main players, and then everyone's kind of a role player now. Would they be willing to accept a role playing for their national team? That's the hardest stuff to find, because you've almost got to project out of the back of that. Do they can they step up in the big moments? How do they play? How do they handle adversity? So there's so many elements to the character part that we've kind of got to go into. So generally speaking, we look at those three streams. We get we obviously speak to a lot of coaches and people and experts that can guide us along the way, and then from there we kind of as scouts, and in particular my role, what we do is we watch tape and we'll speak to people and we'll do a thorough analysis, and then we'll recommend them to the Center of Excellence, NBA Global, which is obviously one of the same. And then after that, then it's kind of up to them to see where their journey takes them.
So let's kind of do this in reverse of the three strands that you mentioned. So if we go into that character piece to begin with, I guess firstly, how many do you have anyone working below you in terms of voluntary roles and stuff within that scouting network that are regionalized, that are able to help you gather that information? Or if you don't, how do you go around doing it? I think you mentioned earlier there was like 4 or 5 of you, but how do you go around covering Australia, being able to gather that information? Because that's quite a lot of intelligence that you're trying to gather. And obviously, I'd imagine you're going to want to get first-hand references or first-hand examples rather than it becoming second or third or fourth person going, well, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. So how does that work in terms of, do you have anyone in a layer underneath you guys? And how do you go around actually getting that intelligence from a practical perspective?
Yeah, so each state has a state coaching director. So we normally start with that person. Now, if that person doesn't know who the player is, well, then we can generally get to the coaches. And as we over the years, in particular, all of us have been around for so long. We're only 1 or 2 people removed from someone that knows that player. So we'll go into speaking. I guess the best person obviously is talk to previous coaches. That's a real big one. We don't tend to speak to school teachers and things like, but occasionally I have, just to get a bit of a sense of what the person's really like. There might be even friends of the family that we know that have played with that player before. So we do, at least for myself, and that's one of the things I feel like I've been able to do a really good job with over the years. And it's probably because I've coached at so many different levels over the years. I've built up this big network of people that I know and trust. There's just people that just know basketball in particular states or regions that I can always kind of ask, and it's amazing. It's amazing what people will tell you when they trust you. And that's one of the things that I tell a lot of up and coming people that want to get into the scouting world about how important it is to build trusting and genuine relationships. So by doing that, when you are seeking information and gathering intel, you can get it quickly and fast, and you know that's coming from a good place. So obviously we speak to about, probably generally speaking 3 or 4 people. And if there's a common trend, good or bad, then we go with that, and that kind of gives us some comfort that we've got the right information.
And how do you manage the relationships that maybe you don't have such good dialogue with an individual? Because I imagine, being in the coaching world, there's probably some coaches that you've previously got on really well with, and that's an easy phone call to go, Tony, how are you? How are the wife and kids? Blah, blah. Compared to someone where maybe you don't agree with the way they coach, or one of their players has left to come to you, or they've headhunted one of your players and whatnot. How do you manage getting information from individuals like that where it may be slightly more challenging because of the relationship you have?
Yes, no, that happens sometimes. So I guess what I try and do is I try and scout the person that I need the information from. So I'll speak to people that know them, and then I'll get a bit of an idea on what angle to go into, and whether it's maybe someone that I've had a relationship before that's maybe been a bit strained from back in the days when I used to compete against them as a coach. Now that I'm a scout, like how do we work our way around that? I guess what I try and do is just make sure that just break the ice a little bit, and talk to them about why we're doing it, why I'm seeking information. And generally speaking, like most of the people that I've spoken to in those types of scenarios they just change because they know that their intel might help this player go to the next level or get an opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. So I guess my experience has been good, but not always smooth, because you're right. You've got to be careful too, because sometimes play or coaches will just they will just say everything and say the player's brilliant, and they might not give you everything. So, and look, I have been caught out maybe once or twice with speaking to maybe just two or three coaches that are all just singing the praises, and then when the player actually goes to the the next place, there's some underlying issues that maybe weren't kind of called out initially. So yeah, it's not foolproof, but like I said, my approach for that would be, yeah, scout the person that you need the information from, and then angle it in that particular way. And then, yeah, I mean, in my job as a scout, it's really important that kind of everyone's your best friend. And there's times where you just got to put things aside, even if you don't agree with their methodology or how they go about things, because kind of at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're just trying to find out information that will help us make an informed decision, and that information that I can feed through to decision makers as well. So yeah, that's it can be a bit tricky, and in particular if you've yeah, like I said, if you don't have a strong relationship with someone, or going into it that person might not like you, or might not like the organization that you work for. So there's been times where I'd have to let people vent, and they can tell me all the bad things that have happened in the past for with what's happened, or they've been hard done by this person or that person, and I just kind of empathize with them a little bit. So I don't really want to sit there and say no, you're wrong. And it's amazing. Like, I've sat through times where someone's vented for like 10 minutes, and then eventually they just open up and they give me everything that I'm after, and it's just a way of them just kind of getting things off their chest, and then bingo, I've kind of got what I want. So it's funny too, like, they're the types of skills that when you're a little bit younger, you're a little bit more, I guess, impatient. Whereas now, as I'm kind of a little bit older and understand the landscape, about how important it is just to be patient, go with the flow and see what you can get. And if you can't, that's okay. There might be someone else that can help you.
And looking at players that maybe have prolonged success, that maybe because they're in an area of low challenge, they might be the real standout in their environment. And then because of that, that means, they never really match up against anyone in their district or their state that, is able to compete with them. How do you go around assessing their character? Because, it's very easy to be all positive or be very teammatey when you know that ultimately at the end of the game, your team's going to win because actually, no, you're unguardable. You're bigger than everyone, you're quicker than everyone. So you're going to be able to make the difference. That looks very different when you go up a level, go up 2 levels, where actually there is people that are able to compete with you now. And, that might then become frustrating. So is there any particular methodologies you use to try and assess that in areas where maybe someone's standing out just because they are that much better than the competition in that particular area?
Yeah, there is. So we obviously, and I think everyone's kind of guilty of this, being seduced by the superstar under 10s, under 12s, under 14s player. And that's a tough one too, and particularly when players are just naturally gifted, physically, and also just talent wise, that can just almost just cruise through their junior career without too many challenges. I mean, what you'll find is they'll hit adversity at some stage for the most part. And the other common trend, and I know that it's talked about a lot, in particular with basketball, which is a late maturing sport. So you'll find that a lot of the players, and most of the ones that have gone on to play professionally, are late developers, players who have missed out on making state teams at a young age. So recently, just some examples recently, obviously Josh Giddey was one of those, didn't make a state team, I think, until his top age under 18. And then that's the stuff that kind of drives and fuels them, like Joe Ingles was similar as well, got overlooked, and then didn't make a state team until I think he was in under 18s. And that's one of the things that we've got to be really, really careful of. So what we do, generally speaking, is we try and look for our age bracket is between 17 and 22. But we do kind of keep an eye on who's doing okay below that age bracket. But at the same time, we just make sure that we're not getting too high or too low on certain kids, because over the years, and what we've seen is, generally speaking, and particularly on the boys' side, they're late developers, and they're the ones that have to, they persevere, and they end up, kind of going on and taking that, I guess, that grit with them all the way through. So every time they step on the floor, they've got something to prove. Now, on the flip side, which is what you were, I guess, alluding to initially, was what do you do with the players that are always super talented? So what normally happens is they do get challenged, in particular when they go to the Australian Junior Championships, when they play in the state tournaments, because that's the best of the best. So you really find during that week, and that's a week tournament, what players can back up 2 games in a row. Sometimes there might be 2 games in one day, and they've got to be, that's really testing them out. And I think you find some players that are great at a district level, but they may struggle at a state level, and then in addition to that, there might be some great state players, but just don't have whether it's the IQ, or even maybe sometimes even the athleticism, speed, to be able to translate that to the next level at international level. And that obviously generates a lot of interesting conversations, because people are like, well, they're doing it at this level, they should be able to do it at that level. And we get obviously when we pick our state squads, that's one thing. But then when we pick the Australian junior camps, there's always there's always people that miss out, and it's a little bit unfortunate. But generally speaking, you'll find that they'll get challenged at some stage, and it's normally when they go to state tournaments. And then because that's really, if you can get through that week of intenseness, that's a pretty good indicator. Now, if you don't, and let's say you're able to get through that, and then you end up getting into the international stage, and you can get through that, and then you get through to the professionals. What I've seen juniors who have been able to be great at state and even international level, but sometimes when they get into the professional level, things can change, because it's obviously a lot more cutthroat. There's if you get injured, it's a setback. Sometimes people, a lot of players that can come through their junior career and not have a serious injury, and then when they make it as a professional, get an injury, and all of a sudden things can turn really bad, because you've got to do rehab. All of a sudden you're not a priority to people. You've got to drive that yourself. And then one of the things too that I've found over the years, and one of the things that I really look for, is the love of the game. So like, if someone loves the game, well, if they get injured, they're going to be totally committed to doing their rehab as quickly and as precisely as possible, so they can get back onto the floor, and then join their team and play basketball again. I find that some players that don't really love the game are not in a rush to get back to the court, and they won't do their rehab as well as they should, and then they get subsequent injuries off the back of that. And then sometimes they're labelled with that person just can't catch a break. They just seem to get injured all the time. So I guess to answer your question, people get found out at some stage. What metrics? We don't have any metrics as such. It's a hard one, right? Like, how do you measure grit? How do you measure perseverance through adversity? That's a tough one. I don't know if there is a measure. If there is, let me know. But it's kind of like, we just got to do some investigation about what happens. What are some of the setbacks they've had over the years? And if they haven't had any, in particular as they're a junior, that's a concern for me, to be honest, because we've all seen the player, the junior player that gets the free ride through, and then bang, they hit adversity when they get into the senior system, and it's not pretty. So yeah, that's just some of my observations.
Perfect. So I guess moving on to the physical side, which you mentioned earlier, obviously you've discussed a little bit around, I guess, bio-banding or rate of growth and all that stuff, and how that might affect players. I guess there's 2 questions for me around that. So firstly, do you use any particular tests? I know that's a question mark around in the UK, at least, when we start bringing in those type of tests of how high they can jump, how quickly they can turn and stuff, because when's it relevant? So yeah, do you guys do any testing, get any testing data that you're able to assess the players by? And I guess 2, for looking at those players when you're trying to project, how do you manage when they're going through high growth and someone that maybe has had really, really good ball handling before, but now all of a sudden they look like one of the Mr. Men and their arms are floating everywhere and they can't control the ball. So, yeah, how do you kind of manage that? I guess that's more of a coaching, little bit of a talent ID point of view. But yeah, do you use any testing and how do you support those guys who are going through high growth, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So with me personally, so I've got a few. Obviously the anthropometric scores that you can get, like the stock standard. You know, the length, width of their hand, their vertical jump, and like so. Obviously, along those lines, things that are important to basketball. As far as the growth and how high someone might grow, that's always a tough one. Look, parents are a pretty good indicator, generally speaking. And once again, a lot of the late developers have these crazy growth spurts, and what I've seen between when they go between under 16s and under 18s. So that's always a bit of a kind of an indicator. It's a tough one to kind of judge how tall someone's going to get. But like I said, we do keep an eye on the parents. A lot of the players in recent times have come from, or it might be kids of professional athletes have played at high level sports in the past. So we've obviously got, so Ben Simmons, his dad played in the NBL here. Even Dante Exum's dad played as well. So we've got a lot of players that have come from, with their fathers or their mothers have been professional sports players. So as far as all that's concerned, we don't delve too deep into that. Like, we try and get some information, but for us, it's more so kind of the eye test and just a bit of a gut feel. And then from there, if and when they do get an opportunity to go to the any of the Australian junior camps, they do all the testing there. So vertical jumps and all the other things, the stock standard testing that goes on there. So that would be kind of, we don't kind of, from a scouting perspective, it's it's more of the eye test and what we can kind of gather versus having like a set guide of these are the ones that we need, otherwise they can't kind of get through the next stage. And the other thing too, like I said previously, it's not the be all end all, because there's obviously a lot of players that play at high levels that their IQ is absolutely amazing, and their decision making and positioning on the court can overcome any kind of limitation they've got physically. So you look at Paddy Mills, for example. He's 6 foot, but he's super quick, and he's probably one of the smartest basketball players going around, and he's an elite shooter and one of the most tenacious competitors you ever want to see in your life. And like for us, you just got to see the way he went about his business and in the Olympics and helping the Boomers win their first bronze. It was amazing, and it was such a struggle for the whole group along the way. We got so close for so many years over so many tournaments, and then to see them persevere and come through. So I think, like I said, it is, ideally we want these long athletes, but at the same time, it's not the be all end all, obviously, because there's other things, and Paddy Mills would tick all the boxes when it comes to character, adversity over the years. Obviously, even the lockout, he'd come back and play in the NBL, and he persevered and went back to the NBA and ended up winning an NBA championship. So that's a classic. That's an amazing story. Now, as far as kids that are like you said, they might be long and they might be a little bit kind of uncoordinated as they're kind of growing into their skill set. We are very patient with players like that, because historically, you just if and when everything kind of clicks, then magic happens. Even if you look at a player who did play in the NBA, you might not be too familiar with him. A player called Luke Schenscher, played a couple of years in the NBA, played for Wake Forest in the US college system. He was long and he's 7 foot tall, and he took a little while to actually get his length and to catch up, and his coordination to catch up with his length and his size. And then when it did, he clicked and he found some great situations and went on to had a great career. So we are very, very tolerant, and this is the thing too. We need to. As far as my role as a coach educator, and we're telling out a lot of the coaches here that with the bigger, taller, longer kids, they take longer to develop their coordination, but stick with them. And then if and when it clicks, then magical things happen. And that's the hard part about trying to sell that vision to a lot of coaches that are thinking about let's win now, let's win now. And sometimes those players can kind of get cast aside into lower divisions, and they don't get the better coaching, and then sometimes they're lost to the sport, and they might go and play another sport and get picked up and then bloom from there. And then we're kind of looking back going, where did we go wrong in that situation? So because in Australia, we have our biggest competitor is AFL football, which is Aussie rules football, and they're all over our players because the games obviously are similar because they're both invasion sports, and good basketball players can operate in tight spaces, which is perfect for Aussie rules football.
Perfect. So before we come on to that, because that was going to be my last question around that cross bit, how do you manage a player that maybe tests very well around those verticals and all that type of stuff compared to what you see on tape? Because I'd imagine you will, as you kind of mentioned there, you'll have some individuals that the IQ for the game allows them to excel. But you'll have those other individuals where you're looking at all their testing and going, I haven't seen anything like this, like in terms of their speed, their agility, their vertical jump. So how do you manage that dynamic of going, we've got a physical beast here, but actually we think we're going to be able to add some technique or skills or IQ to them to make them really, really great compared to someone else goes, their testing's average, but actually all the intangible stuff on the court we really like. Yeah. How do you manage that from a talent ID perspective?
Yeah, so I guess it's that's the art, right? Trying to figure out who's going to project and be kind of more successful. Now, there's two sides of that, right? So for me, I really rate IQ because the game is such a dynamic game, and it's such a series of quick decisions in a confined space, and especially the way how quick the game is now. Like, I really rate that. And you look at players like Luka Doncic or even Joe Ingles, who aren't super quick, but they're able to just play in slow motion and just beat people off the dribble whenever they feel like it, just because they know when to attack and what position and the angles, etc. So for me, it's like the way that we kind of treat it is, can they use that decision making and positioning, and can they translate it to the next level? So that's the key. I guess it depends on what obviously what position they play. It's obviously easier if you're playing a more of a wing or a guard position, but if you're an undersized big, sometimes that can be is a little bit slow to get up and back. That can be a little bit of a concern. On the flip side, if you've just got an athletic, beast, then look, we want to try as much as we can and get the best coaches helping them out. And sometimes, they'll have to kind of jump the queue a little bit and get the better coaching, and see whether we can help them understand the game, make the right decisions, and get them to understand when to use their speed and not use their speed, and when to use their jumping ability, because sometimes players can be super athletic, but they just might have no idea, and they're always getting in foul trouble, and they don't understand different concepts or schemes. And look, the higher up you go, you need to have a baseline level of intelligence to understand how to play. Because if you don't, you have seen this at all different levels of sports, you will get targeted. And if you can't guard your own position, or you struggle guarding particular actions, the higher up you get, it just becomes almost impossible for those guys to play in that environment. So you want to try and invest and go kind of all in with those players and try and educate them and try and get them up to speed as quickly as possible. And then, you just kind of fingers crossed. And if it does click and they can get the combination of athleticism, decision-making IQ and positioning, and understand how to play the game, then you've got something special on your hands. And I think what we need to do is, and one of the things we always preach, is be patient, persevere, be obviously positive, and have solution-based kind of conversations with these players to help them learn instead of the old school getting angry or ignoring them or playing crazy mind games. We want to take an intelligent approach because we know that if we can get it all to click, then, magic happens.
And to look at it from the final point of view, I guess, around the skills side, you mentioned earlier around trying to produce an environment that they're able to play in multiple schemes across multiple positions and good variation. I think a lot of, as you mentioned, the NBA players that have made that leap are able to do that. Obviously, Ben Simmons, particularly with his length, is able to play across multiple positions. Patty Mills, Joe Ingles. I know Bogut was a little bit before that, but in terms of how he had that centre position and what he was able to do from a defensive point of view as well, how do you create a curriculum or topics that allow you to explore that? Because obviously you want a level of continuity so people begin to understand roles and responsibilities, because a pick and roll big is very, very different to one who's going to stand in the paint and receive and try and work their way in with that. So how do you go about creating a curriculum that allows that experiences to be so vast and allow them to develop a wide range of skills that might help them at the next level?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I've seen evolve a lot over the last couple of decades, and it's something that's been driven by Basketball Australia. And back in the day, a great man called Patrick Hunt, who drove, I guess, this revolution of multi-skilling players and teaching them how to play in any system and getting them to understand all the different concepts. So players can play out of pick and roll, players can play out of off the ball screen actions, where they need to go when there's penetration and there's receivers. So just basically going, okay, state coaching directors, we want to produce players that are obviously multi-skilled, can play, multiple positions at both ends of the court, but they need to know how to play and understand different concepts so they can plug in and play in any offense or any defensive scheme. So we really spent a lot of time. I remember this in the 2000s and even in the 90s, where we were very motion offensive based. So we would say, lots of movement off the ball. We would want to make sure that we're constantly looking to attack the basket when we get opportunities. We'd have back when post play was popular, we'd have offenses where we'd get the ball into the low post and there'd be some split action where or cutting on the weak side, and we'd have sometimes we'd even post up our guards and just make them understand all the different aspects of the game. So I think that's been an approach that has really worked, and it's filtered down from the top. And we're lucky because we don't really have kind of any we've got school basketball, but school basketball doesn't really is not taken as serious as it is in other countries. Obviously, the US has a different system there. Obviously, it's more school-based versus club-based. But with the high performance program here, everyone's aligned. We don't kind of have anyone arguing about the style of play. Everyone kind of follows the script, which is good. And it makes it a lot easier for when the players do come to into our national teams or go to the COE, that you can continue their learning and they have a baseline understanding and IQ. And I think that's probably been a bit of a secret weapon of ours over the years, because traditionally with Australian basketball players, they are really unselfish and they want to play a role and they want to help the team win, and they're not I guess obsessed with being the man or the woman in the team, so to speak. So in America, I know they have the opposite problem. Everyone wants to be the superstar, whereas in Australia, we're so team orientated, and that's probably why we've got so many players who are successful in the NBA, WNBA, and college, because we produce some great role players. And then in addition to that, we've got some guys that can step up and take over and be superstars like Patty Mills, Ben Simmons, Joe Ingles. So we've got that caliber of players as well. So I think, to answer your question, to keep it consistent, the best way, the methods that I've seen that work over the years is, teach them how to play the game in all different concepts. So whether that's different defensive coverages on how to guard pick and roll, whether it's how to attack how to attack pick and roll coverages. And that way you're talking the same language. It's a lot easier to to plug things in and get moving when you have those, those 3-day camps when you get ready for an international tournament.
Perfect. So I've got two questions left because I'm conscious we're at the time we allotted for this. So the first one for
Sure.
me, what's the greatest challenge in your current roles, and how do you overcome it, or how are you trying to overcome it?
Yeah. So look, with my coach education role, I think the biggest challenge is getting everyone on board with the modern day way of coaching. So obviously, this has impacted all sports, in particular innovation sports, where small-sided games have become kind of the in thing, and more of a games approach to learning, where when you're doing your practice, you're trying to practice decision making against defenders or scenarios that are representative of what happens in the game. And that's complex because it's very different than the traditional rote learning that we've been used to doing over the years, where you perfect a technique or fundamentals as such and expect that to kind of just appear in a game. And that's one of the things that when we sit and we talk about it and we go through different examples of how to, run a drill where you're helping players learn the game while they're playing the game, and you might put constraints on there to try and shape their learning. When we go through it all, everyone is in agreement and like, yes, that sounds great, and we should do that. And I've been doing that for a while, but my biggest challenge is when I go to see them run a practice. A lot of the coaches, and we're very lucky in Australia. That one of the reasons we've been so successful over the years is the hard work from a lot of our volunteer coaches. But at the same time, a lot of volunteer coaches don't have the time to formulate really intelligent drills or scenarios that can really test the decision making of their players. So that's one of the things I probably wasn't ready for that. I've been in my role at the moment for 2 years doing the coach education, and I just kind of thought I'd come in, tell everyone what the best practice is, and then off they go, and happy days. But it's kind of been a little bit the not the opposite, and it's just the ability for them to take that information, do some more research, be their own kind of mad scientist or chef, and come up with scenarios and things that will help their players based on where they are in their development. So I've been obviously doing that still at the moment. I've obviously coached at a variety of different levels, but at the moment I'm coaching beginners. I'm coaching under 10 basketball. And it's been really interesting just to see how players who have just started playing basketball, how they react to this style of coaching in the modern way. And it's messy and it's hard initially, but once the players kind of understand and the better their decision making, they get more space to do things, and then they can execute the skill a little bit easier as well. So it's just trying to find that right balance. But that would be the biggest challenge I would think from I guess for my coach education role. In the scouting role, my biggest challenge obviously is I look after a portfolio which is Aussies and US high schools, and I do that because I want to make sure that we're keeping eyes on those players. So if any of them are good enough to either come to the COE or represent Australia, we want to make sure that we don't they don't get lost in the shuffle. So I guess for me, it's just making sure that I'm always kind of paranoid. Have I missed anyone? Like, is there any other girls that we should be keeping eyes on? Because I've got a list of about 25 boys and only one girl, and I'm just constantly thinking, are there more girls over there? So that's probably one of the challenges that I've got. But I'll keep searching because that's my role.
And then the last question for me, and you're the first person for this new question. Normally, I ask one at the end of each podcast, and I've changed it up, and it's hopefully one I do moving forward. But if I were to ask people that work with you or that you coach or anything like that, how would you want them to describe you as a practitioner?
Oh yeah, a teacher of the game, someone who wants their players to obviously read and react and play what's in front of them. That would be someone that would kind of be the way that I would like to be perceived. I hope I am. I guess I'm obviously passionate. I want to try and bring out the best in my players as well. And I have actually genuine care. Like, I really want people to enjoy what they're doing and try and create a safe and I guess an environment where they can learn and grow. Now, having fun for me, and I guess it's not just, giggling and having bit of some jokes with your mates. It's more so learning and improving, because the better you get at something, the more you're going to enjoy it. So I hope I'm kind of perceived in that way, where the players understand that I'm trying to help them get better, smarter, enjoy the game more, and then they can learn some other lessons in addition to sport and things that they've learned, whether it's just discipline, or just general decision making, and just respect for people around you.
Perfect. Listen, Tony, really appreciate your time and really good insight into the work that obviously you guys are doing out there in Australia, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Thanks, Michael. That was brilliant. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.